I think we're already in a world war, but I think people are wrong to say it's World War III. I think this is the collapse of civilization.
I have been saying for 20 years that they are trying to engineer the war of Gog and Magog, which will annihilate humanity. This will be the ultimate destruction, what Christianity calls the apocalypse.
Hello, dear friends of the truth. My guest today is Christopher Jon Bjerknes. Hello, Christopher.
Hello, Oliver. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we have something before us. First, I have to state a few things. So I'm following your work for years now, and I'm also quoting from your work in my latest book. And I made videos of your work. So I appreciate your brilliant research. I just want to say at the beginning that we have a different view on the Bible. So I'm saying that Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, is a real entity, and I also say that Jesus is a real person. But you are more of the opinion it's just stories and texts. But what is very interesting for me is, for example, the Kabbalistic view on Jesus and so on. So I learned a lot from your research. But just from the start, I want to make that clear that we don't have the exact same opinion. But our main topic, which will also touch all of your topics, is that you think that somebody is plagiarizing you. So you have the floor. What do you think?
I think that the so-called professor, Jiang Xueqin, is plagiarizing my work in 2006, really beginning the end of 2005, running through 2007. I did a series of many interviews with prominent broadcasters. I published an extensive blog and my voluminous book, The Manufacture and Sale of Saint Einstein, and my book, The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians. And I set forth my insight that the Old Testament is a plan to exterminate the nations and leave only the Jews standing on a new earth with a new heavens. And that this was followed by a series of apocalyptic messianic prophecies, including Christianity and Islam, as well as the Midrash, Talmud, and Kabbalah. And I said that these prophecies were taken to be their plans and that they were artificially and deliberately fulfilling them. And I utilized that insight to interpret all the major relevant events of history. I explained the world wars, the American Civil War, the English Civil War, the Reformation, Counter-Reformation, the Crusades, et cetera, on the basis that these events took place in order to fulfill the prophetic plans of the Jews, and that Christianity, Islam, Marxism, Zionism, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, the Jesuits, etc., were all deliberately engineered by the Jews to produce the same.
I told you before that because I'm a citizen of Germany. You mean by certain groups? We have to be precise there because generalizing is forbidden in Germany. So you mean like Kabbalists or whatever?
Okay, do you want to restart?
No. If I explain that, that's also because I have that in my book. I explain it to the viewers. I had to explain that in my book when I cited Christopher, that of course you do not mean that every Jew is working on that, but you mean the religion, Judaism in general. It's crazy that in our country we have to explain that, but maybe just say one sentence that you don't think that every Jew is working on that.
Oh, no, absolutely not. And for 20 years, I said that the primary victims of all this were the common Jews themselves, and that they are in terrible danger because these prophecies call for the elimination of 2/3 of their people. And one of my primary motives in doing all this was to alert them to the fact that they are in this existential danger, and that part of these plans is to maintain a tension, a hatred between non-Jews and Jews, to prevent the Jews from assimilating themselves out of existence, and initially to drive them into the Roman diaspora, and then ultimately to generate global anti-Semitism, which I predicted 20 years ago, and
Yes.
that it would be utilized to end assimilation and force the Jews to emigrate out of the countries against their better natures and their personal will to Palestine in fulfillment of these prophecies. And when I'm referring to Jews, I'm referring to the authors of these prophecies and the leaders that the authors of these prophecies were appealing to fulfill and generate these events to all produce this same cataclysmic outcome, which has consistently been horrific for the Jews. It led them into the ghetto system. It led them into the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was catastrophic for them. David Elroy was another false messiah. Shabbatai Tzevi was a false messiah. And all of these things produce cataclysmic, horrific events for the Jews. And I am trying to rescue them from all of that. So you're absolutely right. Though it appears I'm speaking in general terms, I'm only doing so to identify the specific sources of these as pertains specifically to the authors of these texts and their intent and the religious mythology that they developed as a plan to make their descendants the ultimate heirs to a world in which everyone else had been exterminated. And I utilized all of the primary texts, beginning with the Old Testament. I cited all the verses to explain all of this, and I demonstrated that it exhibits a model that can be utilized to explain these major events in world history, the relevant major events in world history, but it also forms a predictive model that can be utilized to assess current events, where they're going, why they are happening, and the results that they are planned to produce, and how these results will be catastrophic for humanity, including Jewry, and have been throughout history. And I predicted that there would be a global rise in anti-Semitism. I said that the Middle Eastern wars were primarily self-consuming wars for the United States and our European allies, and that they were intended to destroy America because in these Kabbalistic texts, America now plays the role of Rome, the same Rome that destroyed Judea, destroyed the temple, and sent the Judeans into the Roman exile. So the fulfillment of that cycle, it was always intended to be a cycle. The fulfillment of that cycle comes full circle, and the Romans protect the Jews and consume themselves in doing so because they form the vessel, the kelipot, the shell, the husk that protects them. And in order to release the divine spark, according to Lurianic Kabbalah, this shell has to consume itself in protecting it. Just as a fruit ripens when the acorn starts to sprout, the shell breaks off, and the pearl, in order to be released from an oyster, the shell has to come off. So that is part of the process of bringing down America, because it is portrayed as the reincarnation of the Roman souls and of Rome, and it is identified as Edom. And the densest shell of Edom is Amalek. And there are specific commandments in the Old Testament and in Talmud and Kabbalah that Amalek has to be completely blotted out, cut off, which means exterminated. So America not only portrays Rome, it portrays Roman Catholicism and Christianity, which I said 20 years ago was created as a deliberate trap to have this figure, Jesus Christ, who is the Messiah, son of Joseph, subvert the Romans and cause them to disbelieve in their own protective gods. And they believe in this Egyptian concept of as above, so below. So if once they were able to remove the supernatural protection from the Romans had no more gods to protect them. So they were killing off the gods for jealous Yahweh in the heavens, but that also produced the destruction of the Romans on earth. And they felt fully justified in all of this because the Romans were an empire that conquered them, obviously. And they wanted to believe that they were the chosen people, and therefore they had a divine right and a divine plan to eventually bring this full circle and to utilize the Romans to condition the entire world to start to believe and accept this messianic plan to create a kingdom in Jerusalem that would then rule the world with a descendant of King David as the Messiah, as the anointed king to rule from Jerusalem. And it worked. It worked. They brought down the Romans. I explained that part of this model explains why the Roman Empire fell, why the Greek Empire fell, why the Egyptians fell, why the Persians, the Babylonians, etc. And that each one of these historical sequence of events forms a model that replays. And just as human souls are reincarnated in the beliefs of Kabbalah, events play out again and again. And there is in every generation a Messiah, son of Joseph, who is the reincarnation of Cain, the reincarnation of Esau, the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, the reincarnation of King Cyrus, of Queen Esther, et cetera, et cetera. There is also in every generation a reincarnation of King David. And the ultimate process is to kill off Messiah, son of Joseph, in these wars, in the war with Persia. And I predicted 20 years ago that Chabad Lubavitch, the Rebbe Schneerson, was playing the role of the Messiah, son of David, of his generation. And he anointed the Messiah, son of Joseph, of his generation, Benjamin Netanyahu. And he anointed him to engage in the war with King Shiroi of Persia. And I pointed to a series of these messianic prophecies, including Sefer Zerubbabel, the prayer of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Zohar, and several others that all call for these events to happen. So I was predicting 20 years ago that Benjamin Netanyahu would instigate a war with Iran, and he would utilize the United States, Amalek, as the protective husk, the klipa, the kelipat, to protect Israel and also to consume itself in fighting Iran. And I predicted that America would lose this war with Iran because that's part of the prophecies. And then this war with Iran would lead directly into the final war of Gog and Magog. And I explained how there were three parts to the war of Gog and Magog, and the First World War and Second World War constituted the first two parts, and that the third part would be the most catastrophic and destructive part and would annihilate humanity. And I also explained that there was always this biblical plan for a greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates, and that these Middle Eastern wars were engineered to give Israel hegemony in the Middle East and to expand out into the full territory of greater Israel. And I talked about, as many others did, that there was a push to create a third temple to destroy El-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. And I significantly predicted, based upon my model, that they were artificially and deliberately these leaders who are bringing Jewry together with everyone else into these deliberate catastrophes would exterminate the Palestinians under the cover of World War III, and we see these events unfolding. I predicted that they would attack Gaza. I explained that Gaza represents Philistia, and that Netanyahu was playing the role of Samson in his war against the Philistines. The word Palestinian literally means Philistine. I gave prophecies in Zechariah and Zephaniah related to Ascalon and Gaza, etc. I talked about how they would charge up to the Litani River at the same time in Lebanon, that Syria would fall into their hands, etc., etc. So this model was very successful for me in predicting all these events 20 years ago, which have since unfolded. And I guess later we're going to get into what comes next in all of this. Now, relating this to Jiang Xueqin, he has copied all of that, parroted me verbatim. He hasn't done the research. When he is pressed or challenged, he falls apart. He has no response because he doesn't know what he's talking about. What he does is repeat my summaries of my insights and my research and my work. He hasn't done the work. He doesn't have the full understanding. He copies what I've been talking about with Kabbalah as an emanation theory derived from Middle and Neoplatonism and from Gnosticism. And he's being promoted and platformed to millions of people. And I've been discussing these things for 20, 30 years. This is my life's work, and I have been suppressed, silenced, and censored throughout. And these people are aware of it. These people like Alex Jones know my work. They're aware of what's going on. And this needs to be exposed because he is also marrying many of the things that I have come up with things that I do not believe are true and are leading people into disaster. It is a red flag and highly suspect that he is employed in communist China and makes his residence in communist China. And communist China plays a prominent role in this eschatology as the Eastern behemoth power to help destroy the West.
So maybe at this point we will play a few clips now. First of all, is he really a professor? Because I noticed that Alex Jones doesn't call him a professor anymore. He says geopolitical analyst known as professor. So did you check that if he really is a professor?
He is not a professor. He now concedes that and has been now open about the fact that he is a high school teacher. His presentations are done in English and are not intended to appeal to the Chinese, but are instead propaganda for the Western audience. Again, I find all of this highly suspect. He went to Yale. I believe he's a Canadian citizen. He was born in Red Communist China. He went to China in the early 2000s to film as a journalist an expose on the Chinese labor movement and was interned and then released. And this is not typical of the way that the communist Chinese had dealt with people in Tiananmen Square and other events. And it is also highly suspect that he goes around plagiarizing my work verbatim, does not give me credit. So we are not dealing with a forthright person.
Yeah, so, I mean, he explains it that China is not interested in him because he only appeals to English audience. But what I have to say, which confirms what you're thinking, is for a professor or somebody posing as a professor, it's very, very rare not citing anybody. For example, I put out a paper, 20 pages recently, and I cited everybody in the field. You know, it's normal to cite other people. Not only doesn't he cite you, he doesn't cite anybody, and that's very strange.
And it also strengthens his position if he were to cite me, because I do have the credibility and I do provide the sources. I'm eager to cite my sources to help validate and demonstrate my work. It's a very important part of scholarly work, as you say. And my understanding, he is a high school teacher and portrays these as lectures that he's giving to some of his students on his predictive history or whatever it is YouTube channel. It's also suspicious that when he repeats things I've been saying for 20 years that got censored off of YouTube, my channels got taken down and nobody would have me on to talk about it. He gets platformed everywhere and censored nowhere. And these people are aware that this is my work that he's presenting, and they never confront him with that.
Yeah, I mean, especially with Alex Jones, we know that he knows, but because there was always the fight, Adam Green always wanted to be at the show. He blocked me, by the way, and so we both have not good feelings about him. But we know
he
from
also
that
habitually plagiarizes my work, and even his attacks on Alex Jones are highly derivative of what Eric Hufschmidt, Wing TV, and Daryl Bradford Smith were doing 20 years ago. And what, who was it? Bill Cooper was exposing Alex Jones. So everything that Adam Green does is also copying someone else without giving an attribution to those people. And he's another one who gets platformed parroting my work. And these people are aware because I explained all this to him on his show, and it was listened to by hundreds of thousands of people and many of the major influencers. So they're perfectly aware of it, and they are just honestly not confronting him with the fact that he's plagiarizing my work.
Right. So we prepared some clips so where we can show. So we go through the first clip. I hope it's the right how's it called? The right sequence. America and Iran is the first one. I play that, okay? I don't know if it's really the first.
I think we're already in a world war, but I think people are wrong to say it's World War III. I think this is the collapse of civilization.
That was the collapse of civilization, but it doesn't matter. Maybe address that.
I have been saying for 20 years that they are trying to engineer the war of Gog and Magog, which will annihilate humanity. This will be the ultimate destruction, what Christianity calls the apocalypse, the battle of Armageddon. And I was criticized for being alarmist and ridiculous, and people were saying that they would never want to do that because that would hurt themselves. If they wielded those weapons, they would cut their own hands with them. And I said that you have to understand that this is the plan. This was always the plan, that they developed the system of mutually assured destruction themselves. The communists were involved in that in America. Oppenheimer and the Hungarian Martians, as they were called, were communists in this group, and they developed the atomic bombs to wage atomic war on Germany. Lisa Meitner took the idea of a chain reaction from Otto Hahn, who had established and proven it. Niels Bohr gave some of this German research and technology as a spy over to the Allies. And they were the ones who created this bomb, which fit in with their eschatology. And then to further their eschatology from the book of Job, they explain that there will be a great battle between the behemoth and the Leviathan, and they will mutually destroy each other because they represent so few people and such physically powerless people. They have to engineer brothers' wars and get the nations to fight one another and mutually destroy one another. So these very same people were communists, and Ethel, the Rosenbergs, gave this technology over to the Soviet Union together with David Greenglass, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, and numerous others. And they created this system of mutually assured destruction. And then they gave over Edvard Teller's ingenious designs for thermonuclear hydrogen bombs. And they created this system of mutually assured destruction. And that has always been the plan. Christianity represents the Leviathan in the book of Job, and Islam and communism of the East represent the behemoth, the land powers of the book of Job. Now, the United Kingdom has always been a great seafaring power, and it spawned the United States of America. And together we represent what is referred to as the Atlanticists, and then the Eurasianists of the communist powers incorporating the Muslim powers, which was the original behemoth power, have been structured so as in this battle of Gog and Magog, which is forming up, we will kill each other off, and that will leave Israel as the sole standing power. But the Jews are also in tremendous peril because these same prophecies say that they have to be redeemed by passing through a furnace of affliction. The dross has to be separated from the gold and silver. The Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, has to be expelled, and they have to suffer so that when their souls are reincarnated, they are purified. So the plan is also to bring the whole world against them. Now, isn't that a horrible thing to do to your own kind and to your own people? But they will do it because that is the plan, and they adhere to it very strictly and always have, and have been tremendously successful, which builds in them another thing that he's copying from me, this tremendous hubris that keeps them going on this plan, because they look back at what their ancestors planned for, how it has enriched them and empowered them, and they want to keep it going and they want to bring it to fulfillment. And they see the fulfillment of this as a restoration of the whole world to perfection, because they believe in the origins of creation. There was a tremendous catastrophe. And Lurianic Kabbalah reiterates the Babylonian conception that in order for there to be a creation, you have to first contract the body of God so that there is a space that is separate from God. Creation has to be separate from God. And you need a demiurge to be emanated from God to manufacture this creation, who also has to be separated from God, because God is perfection. Anything that deviates from God is imperfection, so God cannot be both. Now, this creation was imperfect. This creation of Yahweh was to take place across 6 days, and those 6 days are 6,000 years from the creation of Adam. This creation was flawed. Initially, there was a tremendous light emanated into this void, this Tzimtzum contraction of the Ein Sof, the infinite, and the Ur Ein Sof, the infinite light, penetrated into this vessel of this contraction. But it wanted to return to itself because it was the divine light. So it flittered back and forth, back and forth. And eventually the demiurge and etc. started to create these vessels to contain this light. But they were immature vessels. And the light was initially tremendously bright and powerful. So it shattered the 7 lower of these 10 vessels, and the emanations proceeded in a series like a bolt of lightning through these 10 vessels. The 7 lower ones shattered, and this shattering of the shards, these shards form the primordial chaos, the shells which contain these divine sparks of light. And Isaac Luria came up with the conception that this creation, this flawed creation, has to be rectified, and that there were several worlds preceding our world, etc. I don't want to dive too deeply into the esoterica of it all. But the summation of it is that the Gentiles are part of this world of the vessels. And Jewry is part of the world of the divine sparks. And they have to be freed from these vessels in order to return to their source. And they have to return, the word is teshuvah, just as they have to return to Palestine, they have to return to God, and they have to correct the flawed creation of Yahweh themselves within this 6,000 year period. And that if they fail to do so, Yahweh, primarily Shekinah, the female aspect of the Yod He Vav He, the Vav He of the Yod He Vav He, will bring about catastrophic events on the earth. And they also portray themselves as trying to convince the Gentile world to adopt all of these prophecies and become Noahides, so that none of these horrors have to commence, and the gods will not come down and rectify their flawed creation themselves, and instead humanity can do it on its own. So the Kabbalists are making appeals to the Gentiles to become Noahides and to study Torah now. And the alternative is that if that does not occur, if the world does not become entirely righteous, then the world will become entirely evil and it will be destroyed as it was in the flood. And then this Messiah will arise as the new Adam, and he will spawn 600,000 immortal androgynes, just as there were 600,000 Israelites who went with Moses to receive the Torah on Sinai. And then the world will be cleansed and the world will be rectified. And part of that rectification of the world, the tikkun olam of the world, is to eliminate the Gentile world. So that is the threat to the Gentile world. The threat to the world of Jewry is that they plan to wipe out 4/5 or 2/3, depending upon which prophecies you follow, of their own. This is not good for anyone. I have been warning people that this annihilation is planned and this annihilation is coming. I am not Chicken Little saying that the sky is falling. My predictions have been fulfilled with 100% accuracy. It is part of the public record. From my most recent to my earliest, they have all been fulfilled. And that is why I am once again warning Jews and Gentiles that they are staging and engineering all of these catastrophes because they take their eschatological, messianic, apocalyptic prophecies as a set of plans which they themselves must be fulfilled. And I've been saying that for 20 years, and now he is very recently copying me.
Yeah, but what you explained just now, did he also talk about that? I mean, we have other clips, but
oh no, he has no real understanding of what he's parroting. He only talks about the surface. My summaries of all of this by my saying they're going to have the war of Gog and Magog and that everything will be annihilated. He has that very shallow set of talking points that he copies from me, which is why it's so important that I be credited, because I understand and can prove where those conclusions come from, how I deduce them, how the fundamental principles can be induced from them, and the full structure of my model, which incorporates the actual prophecies. You don't hear him quoting from the prophecies. He only copies me by peripherally referring to Ezekiel or something when I talk about Gog and Magog, chapters 38, 39. But you don't hear him digging into the Sefer Zerubbabel, the wars of the sons of darkness against the sons of light, etc., the Zohar, the Sefer HaMashiv, and many others.
Okay, let's go.
And I want to do that. I don't just want to expose this plagiarist. I want to use that as a vehicle to get people to understand, Jews and Gentiles alike, that we are in imminent danger of complete destruction. And I can prove it because I can demonstrate that that's the plan and that they have been following the plan and that that plan has produced great catastrophes for everyone on earth, most especially for Jewry itself.
Okay, we go to the next clip. I don't think it's the sequence we agreed to before. I just you have to you just say something about the next clip. And what was interesting to me that you also talked about that. I think it's the colonizing of Greenland and so on. I play the clip now.
I think we're already in a world war, but I think people are wrong to say it's World War III.
No, that didn't work. So I think it's that didn't work. Okay, wait. I have to search for that particular clip, but
you can just play them in whatever order I can respond on.
yeah,
I don't think it's too important to formulate some kind of sequence unless that's what you'd like to do.
Yeah, no. The problem is it doesn't play because I don't find it on the. It played the old clip, you know. Okay. But wait. I have to, the thing with the king. Where is that now? To play it, I have to find it on my desk. That's the problem. I have it in the. Okay. Prophecy being fulfilled. Wait.
Second thing is you will see the United States colonize North America, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Venezuela, Mexico. Those aren't jokes. Those are not jokes.
Did you hear that?
Yes, and I have done an extensive series of presentations in the past couple years on the plans to take over Greenland, take over Canada, Mexico, and formulate an American Siberia to be utilized as concentration camps for the Europeans who they are setting about to destroy because they view them as Rome and Edom. Prior to that, 20 years ago, in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, I revealed that this was all a long-term plan to conquer North and South America in part of establishing this global government, just as communism and international communism are part of this plan. They want to destroy the sovereignty of every nation, and they juxtapose communism as the messianic plan for a global government together with Zionism to form the nation of Israel so that their king can rule from their nation. And I had an epiphany when studying Einstein. Einstein was for Zionist nationalism, but for globalism for all of the nations. And it occurred to me immediately that that was simply their messianic plan from the beginning. And I cited Edward Mandell House and his plans as a socialist who was the handler for Woodrow Wilson, and a book that he wrote, Philip Drew, Administrator, and he talked about conquering Mexico. I talked about Andrew Johnson and the whole plan to take over, and they bought Alaska, and they wanted also Canada and Greenland and Iceland. And in my blog, I talked about Hugo Chavez and how they were setting up a series of communists in Central and South America to form up a bloc that could eventually be taken over. And very recently, I tied it all in with Javier Milei and his connections to Chabad and the Rebbe. So I've been covering that very extensively for decades. And he is now catching on.
How does that fit in that they first bring Hugo Chavez up there and then they, how is it called, take him? How does that fit in?
Because it provided a pretext. If you remember, he talked about George Bush being Satan and farting, and he waved away the bad smell from Bush's farts. So that creates an animosity, which provides a pretext for attack and conquest, the same way that Putin utilized the Russians that Stalin put into eastern Ukraine in the Donbass as a pretext to move in and make it Novorossiya, New Russia. So this is a consistent plan. They create fault lines and animosity, and eventually all of this goes back to Bolivar and the revolutions in the 19th century and onward. And I have proven that, I'm losing it now. Pancho Villa and others of the Mexican Revolution were crypto Jews and were fulfilling all of this plan. And it was constantly to create a socialist system that could then be utilized and condition the people to socialism and to world government to get the United States to move in and create a North American Union incorporating South America and take it all over, and then bring all those people into the United States and chase the people of European descent into these northern regions of American Siberia, because they not only equate white Europeans with Edom and with Rome, but also with this Greek idea of the Hyperborean race that lived in the Arctic region. And I quoted Casanova and other Kabbalists who talked about the idea that there is a portal in the north, and that the North and South Poles form portals to an inner world, and that they wanted to conquer these lands in order to gain access to these portals in this inner world, because Kabbalistically, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life invert, and the hell of the inner world becomes heaven, and the surface of the earth is going to be rendered into hell, which is why they are filling the atmosphere with sulfur, which is brimstone, and they are setting all kinds of fires, and they are trying to generate changes in climate and weather and convert the surface of the earth into hell as they are building these underground worlds. And I talked about these troglodytes that go back to the early Christians, the Essenes, and others from Libya all the way through Judea and these early Christian cities in Turkey, that it was always the plan to create these subterranean worlds. And it gets into the occult idea of the black sun being inside of the earth, and this is the future world that they want to build. So these Kabbalists wanted, and a lot of these guys who explored Greenland and Iceland were Freemasons, and explored the Arctic and Antarctica were Freemasons. So this was all part of this plan, and they ultimately want to create an inner world and cause tremendous suffering on the surface of the earth. And they want to bring fire from the heavens down onto the earth, and they can now do that with nuclear weapons. So all of that has been something, once again, I have a much more penetrating, deep understanding of all of this than so-called Professor Jiang, and I have been discussing it for decades, and you can see how my thinking has evolved on all of this and all the sources which led me to these conclusions, and the factual history that I have provided for 20 years, that this has been longstanding policy and a longstanding plan. And they wanted to get at the gold and the oil of Mexico, and they were going to try to do it during World War I. And I talked about Maximilian and the involvement of the French and Germans in Mexico in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, and then how they tried to get involved, the Germans tried to get involved in Mexico in World War I, et cetera, et cetera. So I have a much deeper and more penetrating understanding of all this than he does. And if he were ever challenged on it, he wouldn't be able to provide any of that history that I just gave to you off the top of my head. Maybe now he could, because he's listened.
Maybe he did not read it yet. Do you think that really everything is going according to plan? Because I noticed some deviations. For example, the plan of the communists, I mean, there are powers behind the communists, Wall Street financed them, but the initial plan was to spread communism worldwide and through revolutions and so on. And then they decided, no, we split Germany, and Germany, West Germany will be more free market. It's not really free market, but a more free market model. But initially, the communists tried to do all these revolutions. So it didn't went according to their plan. Do you think that was also planned, that it doesn't work out? Or because it's easy to look back and say, okay, that everything was the plan. But do you think there were some deviations of the initial plan?
Well, we now have a communist as the president of the United States, Donald Trump, and all of Europe has become the European Union. Adenauer, Bundeskanzler Adenauer, and Charles de Gaulle had rapprochement after the war and initiated the Kalergi Plan, which I famously explained on Jeff Rense in 2007. And that was financed by Warburg and Rothschild,
Yeah,
and
on behalf of
Kalergi
the
was a
Rothschild.
big,
So
yes,
that's a
and he was a big Freemason. But in
just,
terms of the plan,
yeah, I just want
not
to
succeeding, let's keep it to that.
I just want to emphasize that because that's a big proof in all of that. Because Kudnhöfer Kalergi himself writes that the Rothschilds told the Warburgs to give him the money. So this is a proof there, a very solid proof that the Rothschilds are behind it, and the Rothschilds are Freemasons. So this all ties together. I just wanted to throw that in. So, but
and they were Freemasons involved with Lenin and Trotsky. Trotsky tried to push after World War I through Poland to Germany and take over, as you are saying. And that failed, but then Hitler allowed Stalin to come in and do what Trotsky failed to do. And they divided Germany against themselves. But that was part of the plan of the Kulturkampf, very much earlier, to get the Prussians and Bismarck to fight with the Bavarians and the Catholics and the Austrian Catholics and divide Germany against itself. And Albert Einstein talked about that. During World War I, he was a traitor to Germany in which he lived, and he said that they wanted to split Germany against itself. Now, Marx, Lenin, Parvis, and Trotsky said that the revolution should be permanent, that it should be a constant agitation to completely bring down peoples and reduce their intellect, to exterminate the bourgeoisie, and to make the proletariat, enslave them to the commissars. So Lenin created a plan. They originally deliberately burned the grain in the Soviet Union and starved 30 and mass murdered 30 million people by 1923. American Herbert Hoover, who was to later become the president of the United States, came and bailed the Soviet Union out and gave them food and gave them money. Walter Rathenau helped to bail out the Soviet Union because both Germany and the Soviet Union were pariah nations after World War I.
Who family said that 300 families rule the world. Rathenau.
That's correct. Yes. And Ludendorff quoted that in one of his books, and I found the original article that appeared in, that there were these 300 who ruled everything. But Rathenau created the Rapallo Treaty, which rearmed Germany, and they developed their aircraft and their panzers, their tanks in the Soviet Union, etc. So it wasn't really a failure. It was fake. It was a fake fall of the Soviet Union, and it was modeled after Lenin's new economic policy. Now, Anatoly Golitsyn.
I want to intersect. It's not out in English, but I also have this thesis in my book. It's in the United States of Europe as a model for the New World Order, and it's very clear that they deliberately let the wall come down to spread communism all over the world. What I'm just saying is maybe they tried it before in another way, but we are now seeing playing it out because the European Union is modeled after the Soviet Union. They are not elected commissars who rule over Germany and all the other countries. So that is very clear. But you said that Trump is a communist. How do you justify that?
Look at his overtures to Kim Jong-un, how he pretends to fight with Red China, but everything he does benefits Red China. He came out of the New York liberal community, which is very communistic, and he was always very liberal. He was open to the LGBTQ, whatever it is, movement, et cetera, et cetera. He's always been a crypto-communist, as that whole clique of New Yorkers are, as Chabad Lubavitch and all his connections to Chabad Lubavitch. They're very big in Russia. They came out of Russia. They're highly instrumental throughout the period of the Soviet Union. But another part of this all is, yes, they do something.
Sorry to interrupt. The official story is that Chabad Lubavitch was persecuted by the communists.
It's true that the sixth Rebbe was persecuted by the communists, and guess who got him out of the Soviet Union? The Nazis got him out, and the Nazis delivered him to America, which is another thing that Chiang gets wrong.
Yeah, you
and
mean
there's a
he
book
was
about it.
he was in Poland, and Canaris, the
Yes,
boss of the Abwehr, he got him to America, and without that, historians agree there would be no Chabad Lubavitch.
that's correct. But in the Soviet Union, Chabad Lubavitch persevered, and they now run the Soviet Union. Roman Abramovich was elevated by Vladimir Putin, and Berel Lazar replaced Guzinski as the Guzinski had the World Jewish Congress and was the chief rabbi of Russia, and Putin replaced him with Chabad Lubavitch, Berel Lazar. So they were never extinguished in the Soviet Union, but it is true that there was an epic period when, with all of that, could have been utilized simply as a pretext for Canaris to step in and bring him to America, which is what they wanted. We don't really know for a fact that any of that is actually true. The seventh Rebbe lied about his resume, his education in France, etc. They lie all the time. The founder of the cult, the sect, Shneur Solomon of Liadi, created all kinds of fables and stories about how he wandered in the woods and had all these visions and things. It's all nonsense. So you got to take it with a grain of salt.
We have a clip here about the wandering in the woods. No, is it the walks in nature?
But may I interject one important thing? They do fail, and they blame it on themselves, and they say that this generation was not worthy. But part of their failure is learning what their mistakes are and moving things forward incrementally and setting up the conditions for their ultimate success. They never give up. So it's not really failure, it's just part of the process. And that was also established by their idea, and this is something else that he copies from me, that they would be punished by the destruction of their temple and sent into the exile, and that they were punished to wander in the wilderness during the Exodus. This is all part of the process. So they don't view anything as failure. They don't view evil as evil. They view evil as good. And they say that the people who suffer the most in life are the most blessed because they are rectifying their soul, and their Gilgul, their reincarnation, will be further purified when they are reborn into another body. So it's a continual process. It's difficult to understand things from their perspective, but that's what I uniquely try to do. I try to interject the way it is that they view these things, that they perceive these things. And they view not that the fall of the Soviet Union was a failure. It was engineered to do that. And just as Lenin said that he would create the new economic policy, NEP, so that he could gain access to Western capital, and so that he could send people out in what they called the trust to infiltrate all the anti-communist movements like Ayn Rand did. And it was my unique insight that she was at the tail end of the trust as a trust agent, to go out and take over all the anti-communist movement, as the John Birch Society did, as William F. Buckley brought in a bunch of communists, as the CIA and the OSS were completely infiltrated with communists, all in the name of fighting communism. And they said that they needed these communists because they were familiar with communists and had the connections, and therefore could infiltrate the communists. But it was actually, in reality, the other way around. It was the communists moving in to the government and to the mass media and to the right wing. And the entire Republican Party was taken over by the neoconservatives, who were Straussians and who came out of William Kristol's father's neoconservative movement, who were Trotskyite, predominantly Jewish Trotskyite communists. who took over beginning in the Nixon administration and then especially in the Reagan administration. And one of the communist policies was mass immigration. And Ronald Reagan ran on the idea of getting the illegal aliens out of America, then granted the biggest amnesty in American history to the illegal aliens. And this process goes on and on. But the Republican Party is primarily communists of the Trotsky bent coming and supporting Russian communism. And the Democratic Party is predominated by the Maoist Chinese communists. And they pretend to fight each other.
Because I'm familiar with Ayn Rand, of course, as a libertarian, how does she fit in there? How is she infiltrating? How was she infiltrating?
Because she sought to atomize any form of collective support and to create this mythology of John Galt that she plagiarized from some other author to pit the classes against one another in the name of fighting class warfare and to destroy the leadership of the American economy by saying that they are being attacked by the working class and therefore they should withdraw their support and go and see John Galt and let America fall and let the working class fall. So that would bring about the revolution. She tried to promote the gold standard, which has always been a subversive move, which can create massive deflation and contract the money supply. And she taught people that it was good to be selfish and it was bad to work collectively. So she atomized people so that they could not work together for their mutual benefit. Libertarianism, as was proven by another gentleman, was created by the bankers.
The whole book, The Strike, is about solidarity between the
I'm not familiar with The Strike, but I'm talking about Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead.
Atlas Shrugged, sorry, Atlas Shrugged. So they do a strike, which so you do need solidarity between the entrepreneurs to do the strike.
But then you get a revolt of those who keep society functioning, where they withdraw their support from society so that society crumbles.
Okay.
And she also specifically said that selfishness is good. It goes back to this idea of
that's not a libertarian idea. The libertarian idea is that it should be voluntarily. So I'm not with her on that, but I don't see the subversiveness there. But what I saw just recently is she was also...
Well, she was talking about Zionism and promoting Zionism on the Phil Donahue show, which I saw as it was playing. I'm from Chicago originally. And she was gaining access and framing the positions of what became the neoconservative movement.
Okay. I leave it at that. I also saw
and you can see that Murray Rothbard was an apologist for the Soviet Union. Eustace Mullins pointed all this out. Oh, absolutely. Murray Rothbard wrote several articles trying to say that we shouldn't do anything against the Soviet Union, that there were no threat to the United States, and that we should support them economically.
That you shouldn't mingle.
Non-interventionism is another subterfuge that they wanted so that the communists could go and intervene and spread communism around the world so that the United States would not intervene. You see the same thing happening with Putin. The libertarians all came out
but then
as
you would
apologists for Putin's aggression against Ukraine.
But then you would say you're pro-interventionism. America should go into other countries and destroy them.
No, I'm saying that the motive that they had was a communist motive to make Americans non-interventionists. I'm not taking a position myself. I'm simply explaining the history and the motivations and how it favored the Soviets and not the Americans, because the Americans built up a very successful model on the US dollar as the reserve currency. So they were pushing the gold standard to try to subvert faith in the American dollar. So they were trying to subvert the American dollar, which favored the communists, which favored the communist Chinese, which favored the Russians. Russia's a major gold producer. They have consistently been trying to weaken faith in the American dollar, which is a subversive communist practice. There are a lot of things I can point out how they were subverting American thinking in favor of the communists, while pretending to be anti-communist. And there was a guy who proved that the whole movement came out of the bankers and the von Mises and the Cato Institute, and all of that gold standard stuff was simply a farce, because it also fits in with the messianic prophecies that all the gold of Fort Knox has to be freed up. You have to have private currencies based upon gold so that all the gold can be collected and shipped to the temple in Jerusalem. And again, it was predominantly an attack on the stability and the belief in the stability of the American dollar as the universal reserve currency, which has been tremendously beneficial to the United States. And they tried to destroy all of that for the benefit of the communists.
But you can't deny that the fiat money system is basically counterfeiting money. I mean, you can't deny that.
Oh, I certainly. Counterfeiting money would be creating another fiat currency that was not issued by the government. The creation of fiat currency is a wonderful means of regulating an economy and creating a velocity of money and supplying money and regulating inflation and deflation, but it is susceptible to manipulation and subversion. As colonial script was very wonderful for the Americans, so great that one of the primary reasons that England started to attack the colonies was to get rid of their colonial script, and they counterfeited the colonial script. And Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and numerous other people talked about how wonderful colonial script was, and that they wanted the bankers, the Rothschilds, who were behind, well, it wasn't the Rothschilds yet, but it was the bankers from the Bank of England who wanted to set up a central bank based on gold and silver in America, were one of the reasons that they brought King George III against the colonies, to tax the crap out of them and to prevent them from utilizing fiat currencies. It is these same people who have always been the primary agents against fiat currencies. When you have a gold system, you set up fractional reserve banking where they can create fake money and fake gold reserves. All the things that they try to say are bad about fiat currency are worse with gold. And the very worst thing about gold is that they can collect all the gold, siphon it out through the process of banking so that the economy collapses. First, they inflate it by bringing in gold, and then they deflate it by withdrawing the gold, and the economy collapses. And they did that throughout Europe, and they tried to pull the same stuff in America, and eventually Lincoln issued the greenback, and immediately the Rothschilds wouldn't allow it to trade at par with silver and gold and tried to subvert it. Fiat currency is the most wonderful way of freeing ourselves from the grip of these people, and I'm not alone in saying that. There's a good series of videos called The Money Masters, which explains all that. Eustace Mullins explained all that in his Secrets of the Federal Reserve, and both concluded that the gold standard has always been utilized. There's The Woe of Babylon. It's another good book on all of this.
Yeah, I know all these books, and they're all wrong. The Federal Reserve was founded by the Rothschilds, basically by Rothschild agents. And it's exactly that they don't want a gold currency. So you have inflation, and that brings, the debt crisis. And
it didn't bring inflation. It brought crippling deflation by design. The Depression was engineered. The Federal Reserve worked very effectively to finance the Allies during World War I, and then they deliberately deflated the currency with the Federal Reserve. Milton Friedman explained all of that.
they can do it because it's a centralized power. They can raise the interest rates and they can lower the interest rates. That's exactly the problem with that system. But anyways, it's not an economic discussion. I would dispute that it's bad to have a currency you can print. But let's go to the next.
But I take the opposite position and stand firmly on it, and stand on the ground of Eustace Mullins and many other brilliant people, Ezra Pound, etc.
Yeah, but Eustace Mullins faked a lot of things. I looked into it, and the logic behind that money creation creates wealth is just faulty. But we can't discuss.
Look at the position of the United States. The United States has been the largest economy for many, many years. It was tremendously successful despite its exploitation. Now, imagine if the American government had people in power who actually had the best interests of Americans and not the bankers at heart. It would work even better, as it did with colonial script among the founding fathers.
But you see
You
that
make it
now.
sound as if it's been horrible for America, but it's made America the predominant power on the face of the earth.
Yeah, because if you print money and put a gun on the head of the others to use that printed money, they're exploiting the whole world with it. But it's also bad in the long term because they can just drop the debt now. The Chinese, I think it's quite the opposite. The bonds were bought by the Chinese, and they can tear down the economy at any point of America, and that's the plan. Because if you
the plan was set up by Kissinger and his friends Arm and Hammer to move American production to China and subvert America. It had nothing to do with fiat currency. Nixon saved America by the Bretton Woods thing that the libertarians talk about so much. France wanted to pull all the gold reserves out of America by getting specie payments from the banks in gold and silver of their American dollar reserves. And Nixon said no, and that saved us. So all the things that you are claiming were detrimental to us were highly beneficial to us. Now, does that have a negative impact on others? It has a terrible impact on others, but that is their problem and not ours. It's not a flaw of our money system. It's a flaw of the subversion of them by these same people to be exploited by that money system. So I think you are disassociating the actual causes and effects and efficiency and efficacy of certain systems, when in fact it is not a failure of those systems, but it is instead a deliberate attack on certain groups of people by certain groups of people. And it could be done with gold and silver just as easily or more easily than it could with fiat currencies. And fiat currencies can be wonderful implementations.
No, going off the gold standard created the bubble we are living in now, but we exchanged our arguments. Let's go to the next clip. I don't know where we are now, but you already mentioned so walks in. We don't need walks in nature, right? That's not.
No, that's not. He just advocated getting spiritual healing from taking walks in nature, which is something I've been talking about for decades. I talked about conversations I've had with a Hopi medicine man, etc. And I think it establishes, it's one of those things that establishes that this guy follows me very closely and copies me verbatim, copies my ideas, copies my plans. When I came out and said I wanted to create a new religion, he started to say that he wanted to create a new religion and would be the leader of it. He's just following in my footsteps the same way that Adam Green has.
Shall we go to the Saudis crypto Jews? Shall we go there now? I would show that.
Yeah, you can show that. That's something I brought out uniquely in 2006, that the House of Saud are crypto Jews. I talked about the Dernmay crypto Jews in Turkey and the Wahhabi movement.
Sorry.
There's an argument. I'm not sure if you heard of this argument, but certain Arab nations, specifically Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they're run by crypto Jews.
Okay. Oh.
No, I've been saying that for 20 years, and he doesn't take credit for it, but he doesn't credit me. And I was the one who brought all that out. There are still my blog articles in my blog archive where you can find all of that. And once again, for saying things like that 20 years ago, I was roundly attacked for saying that they are utilizing their messianic prophecies as their plans and they're going to bring the whole world down. I was viciously attacked around the world. I was smeared from every angle. I was deplatformed. I was censored. My channels were banned. My books were banned, taken out of publication. And now why is it? It's awfully suspicious that this guy is saying the precise things in the precise terms with my language, with my pronunciations, and is getting platformed everywhere.
Yeah.
And this is part of this plan to whip all this up and to set it all up. And they're doing it in the name of exposing it. And I always predicted that. I was saying 20 years ago that they are going to create global anti-Semitism. And I was warning Jewish people, this is coming. This is the plan. And they couldn't conceive of it at that time because Israel held such a high position after 9/11. And before that, the Christian Zionists were always pushing Israel and the Israelis, from Munich and the Olympics and things, the raid on Entebbe and all the other things. They were considered to be wonderful commandos and looked up to as being tough and upright and self-defending. And they felt invincible. And they were shocked when I was coming out and saying these things, that they are going to be set up for a global anti-Semitic movement because they were starting to assimilate. And they were assimilating into American culture. They were intermarrying at unprecedented rates. That's precisely what was happening in Germany. And they would do this. They would pull the plug on everything, and that the Jews were going to suffer the worst. And the ones who suffer the worst are the apostate Jews, the Christian converts, the ones who intermarry, the ones who assimilate. They have always been the ones who get hit the hardest, but it's going to be all of them. And I warned them they would bring the whole world against you, because that is the prophecy. That is the plan. It is coming. Please, desperately, I'm pleading with you, help me to stop this. Help me to expose this. Fund me. Get me platform. Get my books out there. I put out my books for free as PDFs, all the way up into, I think I started publishing hard copies of it, paperbacks of it, around 2016. But I put out my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, as a free PDF on my websites for download, and archive.org for download. And I put out my book, Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians, where I explain this whole idea of Amalek that everybody's talking about now. And I explained it also that the West is considered Rome, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I continue to plead with people, please take this seriously. We are in imminent danger of the complete destruction and annihilation of humanity. Pick up your Old Testament and read it. That is the plan. That is what they want to bring about. And they will bring it about by attacking Jewish people, because that pisses Yahweh off. And they think they're going to get Yahweh to intervene on their behalf, when it will instead be the leadership who is engineering their own disaster to bring this about and stage these catastrophic events. And it's going to cost everybody. It's going to cost the vast majority of humanity their lives.
What's happening in Iran, in the Middle East, it is an eschatological war.
So that was a brief proof of that. We touched that already, but only as a proof that that's what you're talking about for many years now. I want to,
for decades.
Yes, for decades. And we have another one. Or I mean, you named them. What should I play now? The thing with Schneerson or Gilgul. I don't know what that is. Gilgul of Messiah. Shall I play that?
Please do.
Okay, because I even don't know what it is, but I'm very familiar with your work. But
Gilgul is the Hebrew word for reincarnation, metempsychosis.
After Rabbi Schneerson's death in 1994, what happens next are a series of
After the Messiah's death.
After Messiah's death, but it's okay for the Messiah to die because they believe in the transmigration of the soul. So the Messiah is always present, but in different bodies. So it takes special conditions for the Messiah to emerge and announce himself. So what they believe is now that the Messiah, Rabbi Schneerson, has passed, his soul is now in another body. And when certain conditions are met, then he will reappear.
Okay, that's a very
now
clear...
I have been the only person to be saying that for 20 years, that the Jews believe in reincarnation, they believe in Gilgulim, and they believe that in every generation there is a Messiah, son of Joseph, and a Messiah, son of David, and then that soul is reincarnated, and that Jesus Christ was one of those. Messiah, son of Joseph, Cyrus was another, Esther was another, and that Menachem Mendel Schneerson was Messiah, son of David, and that he has the reincarnated soul of Shabbatai Tzvi. And I was emphasizing the fact that that was reincarnated into Baruchia Russo, Asman Baba, and then later Jacob Frank claimed to inherit that soul, and then Rebbe Schneerson inherits that soul, and that he was desperate to get his worthy generation of Jewry so that he could be anointed king of the world and rule the world from Jerusalem. And he failed. It didn't happen in his lifetime, but he anointed Benjamin Netanyahu to be the Messiah, son of Joseph, of that generation. Now, there was a Sephardic rabbi, Ovadia Yosef, who claimed to be the Messiah, son of Joseph, of that generation. The Sephardics and the Ashkenazis have their own pairings of Messiah, son of Joseph, and Messiah, son of David. The Mizrahi likewise have their own set of these people. There are competing sets of messiahs, and they believe that the proof is in the pudding. Whoever succeeds will have demonstrated that they are, in fact, the Messiah. But as I was uniquely saying for 20 years, this is a process of reincarnation. And the Chabad Lubavitch cult believes that this soul has been reincarnated into a living person. I believe it's a Rothschild, and that this person is desperate the same way that Menachem Mendel Schneerson was, to take over the world and rule the world from Jerusalem. And that's why we're seeing all these things accelerating and escalating. And I was the only one to point out that this is part of the process of the birth pangs of the Messiah discussed in Matthew chapter 24, the Chevlei Mashiach, and that it matches the labor pains of a woman, which become more frequent and more severe as time passes to stretch out the muscles until the baby is born. That baby's going to be Messiah, son of David. And 20 years ago, I predicted that since Schneerson had anointed Benjamin Netanyahu as Messiah, son of Joseph, Netanyahu would not stop until he got into a war with Iran. And I pointed to the prophecy, specifically of Sefer Zerubbabel, to show how all this would proceed, and it's proceeding precisely as I said. Now, the most dangerous aspect for this outside of the Middle East is that this leads directly into the war of Gog and Magog, as these prophecies say, which is the complete destruction of the nations and the destruction of 2/3 of Jewry. And they are setting up Erdogan and Turkey to play the role of Gog and Magog. And we have now a war in Europe that's been going on since 2014, where the Soviet Union is attempting to reconstitute itself, as Yuri Bezmenov and Anatoly Golitsyn warned us would happen, and said that they would follow the model of the new economic policy to open up the borders so that they could go out and penetrate and take over everything as they have done. We are getting very close to this calamity, to this catastrophe, to the destruction of humanity. Now, what is the solution? That
No, wait. I want to ask a question. What do you think about Ukraine being set up as a safe haven in case Israel goes down, which is planned anyways, so that the remaining Jews can go to the Ukraine, which was in part Khazaria? What do you think about all of this?
I've done a couple presentations about this. There is a Putinist in Ukraine named Igor Berkut, who wrote a book, Brat, I think Brothers is the translation of it. And he talked about this idea of creating a heavenly Jerusalem in the area around Crimea, as you were pointing out, related to the Khazarians, who were a Turkish tribe that converted to Judaism. And this was described by the Armenians, and it was described by a prominent Jewish theologian who wrote a book about the converts, to say that the Khazarians converted to Judaism, but they did not really have Jewish souls. And they found artifacts in this region, etc. But I've brought all this to this idea that the Ashkenazi Jews represent this Joseph branch of Jewry, like Messiah, son of Joseph, like Ephraim. This branch of Jewry is not the tribe of Judah. It is the northern tribes of the Israelites. And that the actual Judeans are the ones who are going to have the Messiah, son of David, and that they will create a split. And since the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is planted in the north of the Garden of Eden, they equate the north with evil, Tsephoni, and with the Europeans, and with this Joseph side of Jewry. And the book of Ezekiel talks about these two sticks, the stick of Judah and David, and the stick of Joseph, and how they eventually get fused, etc. And I think the Ashkenazim represent the stick of Joseph, and they may very well create this so-called heavenly Jerusalem in Ukraine by depopulating Ukraine with this self-consuming war that it is fighting against the Russians. And you have these Ukrainian oligarchs who are also of this tribe of Joseph, of Ashkenazi Jewry, and you have the Russian Ashkenazi Jews of Chabad Lubavitch, etc. And it's also Chabad Lubavitch involved in Ukraine, and they are setting this up and they are encouraging it. And they have created Azov, which is affiliated with Israel, to perpetuate this, and they are killing off the men of Ukraine. They have long been running a white slave trade from Ukraine to Israel to fill the brothels in Israel with beautiful young Ukrainian women. They have a long history. Odessa is a wonderful, beautiful, historic city in Ukraine. Crimea, going back to the Tartars, was a center of the slave trade that these people participated in, together with the Muslims, the Tartars, and the Chinese, to ship out European white slaves. This is part of a thousands of year old process. And I do believe that Igor Berkut and this heavenly Jerusalem plan is part of this plan to create the northern tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they are also creating a southern branch in Argentina, because if they do trigger a nuclear war, the southern hemisphere, and the further south you go, the better off you are in terms of the winds and the currents and the separation of the winds of the two hemispheres. They will be less affected by the fallout from nuclear war, and it will be a more survivable place for them.
According to this theory, are the Philippines affected? I'm just asking because I live here. The Philippines.
Yes, the Philippines would certainly be affected, but they would be far better off than Europe and America and Russia and China and Korea and Japan.
Okay. So what clip should we play next? What would you prefer?
I don't know. I think we're pretty much covering everything. He's copying me about Chabad Lubavitch. He's copying me about the Messiahs. He's copying the idea that they are deliberately fulfilling their eschatological plans, and that all.
Shall I play that with the prophecy being fulfilled? Shall I play that clip? Prophecy being fulfilled?
Please do.
Okay, because I think it's important to show some, because it's really striking. Prophecy being fulfilled here.
It is doing exactly. It is. It's prophecy being fulfilled.
Okay. So, all right.
No, that's what I've been saying, and I've also said that can be utilized as a predictive model, and I've also taken it and utilized it to explain all the relevant major historical events and the destruction of the Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Persians, etc. So I created this model, and I use this model as an explanatory model to explain history, but also as a predictive model. And now he is trying to co-opt all of that and pretend that is what he's doing, but he's simply predicting the things that I predicted 20 years ago.
And what do you think is the purpose of him saying all of that and not platforming you?
He is leading people to become docile the same way that Christianity does. He's telling people that the solution to this is to turn to your neighbors in a very Pollyannish way and kumbaya, and just pretend it all away and just try to be happy, not create any solutions, pretend that there can be no political solutions, that there can be no solutions of military, of force, of revolution. No self-defense can be organized against this. We should simply go along with it. And he's saying that they're succeeding because it's part of God's will, and that it is miraculous that Chabad has succeeded, that it is, and this, he said this right in this Jones interview, that it is miraculous that the Rothschilds were able to enable Chabad to succeed. So this is part of the divine plan.
Do we have that clip? Do we have that clip?
I didn't clip that. It was part of a very long discussion he had with Jones, but anyone who listens to the interview will hear that. So he's leading people down the garden path to fatalistically accept all that is happening. He has tried to make it appear that China is not a threat, that China is at its weakest point, that Trump's campaigns against China have greatly weakened China. Now, if you read Anatoly Golitsyn's book, New Lies for Old and Perestroika Deception, he lays out that that's precisely what the Chinese do. And this goes all the way back to Sun Tzu. When you're strong, pretend to be weak so that people don't prepare their defenses against your aggression and open you up the same way as Lenin's new economic policy opened up the West to Lenin and the Bolsheviks, the same way that the fake fall of the Soviet Union under Gorbachev opened up the West to the KGB. China is playing weak.
We just had the case of a guy who worked in East Germany. He worked at the border, and he was very cruel to people who wanted to flee. And this guy now works in the police union and wants to forbid the AfD. So that's one proof that the communists just came over to West Germany. Angela Merkel was a high-ranking figure in the FDJ, the youth organization. So they really in Germany,
and she was good friends with Putin.
Yes. So
and in Germany, you got sold out by Gerhard Schroeder with Rosatom. You got sold out by Willy Brandt very early on when his secretary was a Soviet spy. You had Rudi Dutschke, who came from East Berlin to West Berlin and started the long march through the institutions. long before that, you had the Spartans, you had Liebknecht, and initially you had the socialists, you had Kurt Eisner, who overthrew the Bavarian monarchy, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of communism came out of Germany. Marx came out of Germany. Friedrich Engels came out of Germany. They called for the genocide of Slavic peoples, et cetera, et cetera.
And I found several Rothschild connections of Karl Marx, not only the known one. In my book, I found another one. Okay, I will make a video about it because it's not widely publicized. So, in your model, what happens next? What are your predictions?
My predictions are that they want to bring down America fighting these Middle Eastern wars. They want to make America a pariah state. I predicted that Donald Trump would try to destroy NATO. They're utilizing conflicts with Greece and Turkey to drive wedges into NATO. I think ultimately America is going to join with Russia in destroying Western Europe, destroying England. I think they want to bring all of Latin America into the United States on the pretext of the United States conquering Latin America. They want to destroy European peoples because they view them as descendants of the Romans, but ultimately they want to bring about a cataclysmic war of Gog and Magog. And they want it to be a series of calamities. In many of the apocalyptic messianic prophecies that I've read, they say that they want to reinstitute the 10 plagues that befell Egypt. And they want there to be a series of 10 plagues. They want famine, they want disease, they want darkness, they want to turn the earth into hell, they want to kill the firstborn. The Gentiles are the firstborn. Jews came later as the secondborn, et cetera, et cetera. And they want to inflict 10 plagues on humanity and ultimately exterminate humanity. And the only way they can exterminate humanity is to get us to exterminate each other. So they want to bring about a mutually assured destructive war between the Leviathan of Christendom, of white Europeans, of America, against the forces of Islam and communism and the Chinese and the North Koreans. And they want to get us to kill each other off. And they're doing everything to set it up. They're weakening NATO. You see, they have to get East and West on par so that when we go to war, it is a mutually destructive war. They don't want a great victory to create new empires the way that they did in the First World War. The First World War was a massive socialist revolution against the monarchies and breaking up the empires. They wanted to free up the Jewish people in the Pale of Settlement so that they could be in the Russian Empire, so that they could be transplanted to Palestine. So they wanted to break apart the Tsar. So they utilized the Germans and the Austrians, the Pan-Germanic Empire, to fight against the Russian Pan-Slavic Empire so that the Germanic Empire could destroy the Pan-Slavic Empire. And they had dreams through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk of Germans controlled by these bankers taking over the Russian Empire and exploiting all those vast resources. And all that had been engineered in the 19th century in Austria. So that was the First World War. They destroyed the Tsar. They created the Bolshevik Revolution. They got international communism underway, and they destroyed the Ottoman Empire, committed genocide against the Amalekite Armenians. And then they got the Turks to turn against their own caliphate, become Turkish nationalists, so that Jerusalem and Judea could be freed up. The Palestine Mandate could be handed over to the British. They were initially siding with the Germans and the Kaiser. They flipped in the middle of the war. An Armenian named James Aratun Malcolm came up with a scheme to get Woodrow Wilson, who was under blackmail, to come in on the side of the British to defeat the Germans and the Ottomans in exchange for the Balfour Declaration. We betrayed our ally, the Tsar, and sent Trotsky into Russia. Ludendorff sent them in with 40 million gold marks into St. Petersburg so that the Bolshevik Revolution could take over the Russian Revolution from Freemason Kerensky, whose father had taught Lenin in school. So that's what the First World War was all about, getting rid of the monarchies, replacing them with socialist governments, creating the Bolshevik government in Russia, and taking over Palestine. Jewish people didn't want to emigrate to Palestine, so they required the Second World War. And then the Second World War did what it did, and then they created the mutually assured destruction system of the Cold World War, anticipating this third battle of Gog and Magog, which the Gaon of Vilna, the great Kabbalist of the Mishnagdim, as opposed to the Hasidim, said would take, I think, about 15 minutes or 45 minutes and be fought out. And then that would usher in the Messiah. And that's what they want. They want to build the third temple. They want to anoint the Messiah, and they want to complete Tikkun Olam within the 6,000 years by getting rid of the rest of humanity and cleansing Jewry of the Erev Rav by killing off 2/3 of them. And they have a number of ways of doing it, and they can do it through disease. They can do it through starvation. They're going to inflict these 10 plagues if they can get away with it. And they're going to try to create social unrest in the United States and in European nations to weaken us from within. So then the Chinese and the Russians will have a much easier time of taking us over. And if that fails, they will simply escalate it to nuclear bombs, just as they're trying to escalate this war against Iran into a thermonuclear attack on Tehran.
And according to your opinion, the Iran war will not end, right? And do you see a nuclear escalation there?
I think they're trying to engineer it right now at the same time that they are trying to weaken NATO and pit America against Western Europe in league together with Russia. Now, it has to be understood that the American president is a Chabad Lubavitcher. He visited the Ol, he visited the grave. I talked about in my book, Putin's reign of terror, the permanent revolution in our time, that this is being orchestrated by this Chabad troika of Trump, Putin, and Netanyahu. And Trump also plays the role of Messiah, son of Joseph, but he plays the Gentile part, which is the anus of Messiah, son of Joseph, which is Armilus, the Antichrist. And he portrays himself as the Christ. Jiang hasn't gotten into copying that yet. He may at some point.
Yeah, and most recently, Maples, Miss Maples said he carried always a portion of the Zohar in his jacket or something. Did you see that?
And she was married to him, so she ought to know.
Yes, so that that's very.
And he included in one of his books article by someone who talked about Kabbalah and how they practice Kabbalah every day.
Yes, exactly.
But he very clearly is involved with Chabad and visited the rabbi's grave, and I did a presentation explaining why they stacked the stones on it to summon the Rebbe, etc. But this is part of the idea that the Rebbe spares the soul of Messiah, son of David, and that that Armilus, Trump, is the Joseph side, not the David side, not the Judah side. He's the Joseph side. And that he gets anointed by the Rebbe to play this role, to play the Christ returned as the Antichrist. The plan was always for Messiah, son of Joseph, Jesus Christ, to return as Messiah, son of Joseph, armless Christ, the Antichrist, and to kill off Christians. And a proper reading of Revelation describes that. And the Gospel of Judas describes that. The Apocalypse of Abraham describes that. The Sefer Mashiv describes that. There was a famous Kabbalist Vale who described that, how Christianity is a deliberate subversion. That's one of the things that Adam Green rips off from me.
And I also think it was not an accident that he portrayed himself. They all said he portrayed himself as Jesus, but at the same time, it's the magician of the tarot card. I made a video about that. I don't think that was accidentally. You remember that when they accused him of he's portraying or he's playing the role of Jesus, but at the same time, he was wearing the clothes of the magician of the tarot deck. Did you see that?
I'm not familiar with that. That's very interesting. Please send me a link to that.
Yeah, I send you that later. It fits well together. Okay, so
and the tarot was developed by the Kabbalist A.E. White.
Yes, exactly.
A.E. White. I'm sorry.
Yes, and maybe explain it. You mention it very often with the Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. Please explain that again in closing. What role do they play? Because I think that wasn't that clear.
It all goes back to the story of Cain, Abel, and Seth. I've given a new interpretation to that whole story. Cain represented the Egyptians, Abel represented the Hyksos, and Seth represents Jewry. And Cain slays Abel. Abel plays the role of Messiah, son of Joseph, and he bears a very special soul, the highest soul, which is Yechida Mashiach, the soul of primordial chaos, which in Kabbalah is the very highest soul, and it's the soul that Gentiles have. And Jacob is jealous of it. Seth is jealous of it. So Abel has to die so that Seth can be born and take his place and inherit his soul. And this model plays out again and again, and it's repeated in the story of Esau and Jacob. Now, in many ancient cultures, the firstborn would get a double inheritance. And that inheritance is equated in Kabbalah to the inheritance of the present world, Olam Haba, Olam Hazeh, and the future world, the world to come, Olam Haba. And it was to be Esau's inheritance to get both. But Jacob was tricky and tried to grab his heel and pull him back into the womb so that he could then be born in his place as the firstborn. And that is part of the process, that Esau has to die so that Jacob can inherit this higher firstborn soul of Tohu, of chaos. And they equate the Gentiles with chaos. The Gentiles are equated.
Edom and Esau are the Gentiles.
Absolutely. Edom, as I pointed out uniquely, is a corrupted spelling of Adam, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, to add a Vav, which is the serpent. The serpent was injected into the bloodline of Adam. Remember that Adam was initially androgynous, and he was divided into his male and female aspects. So Eve is simply the female aspect of Adam. Eve fornicated with and was seduced by the serpent in the Garden of Eden, who infused her with the impurity of Samael to produce the child Cain. They believe that Jewry was cleansed of that when the Israelites accepted the Torah on Mount Sinai, but that the Gentiles still represent that impurity, and that is the impurity of the soul of Tohu. And they want to take it because they believe that the Gentiles are smarter, that the Gentiles engage in science and technology, that they are the gardeners of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that eventually the fruit of that tree will become ripe. But in the meanwhile, the Gentiles will develop that technology to a state where it can be utilized to exterminate them, which is what has happened with chemical warfare, engineered famine, nuclear weapons, etc., etc., etc. Now, this process of killing the Messiah, son of Joseph, is most clearly portrayed in the substitute fool king ritual of the Passion of the Christ, where Jesus is killed. Now, Jesus is killed in the place, Jesus Christ is killed in the place of Jesus Barabbas. And this is in some of the early editions of the book of Matthew in chapter 27. He is not simply called Barabbas, he is called Jesus Barabbas. And he is killed in his place, and his soul is released. And he is killed as a substitute, as a scapegoat, so that Messiah, son of David, can then take over and reign. And that is what is supposed to happen with this war with Netanyahu and Iran and Trump as armless, is Netanyahu is supposed to be killed because his soul, he has to be the last prime minister so that King Messiah, son of David, can then take his place and rule the world. And he is to be killed in the war of King Shiroi with Iran. And that's why they're claiming that Iran is trying to assassinate his son, tried to bomb his domicile, his home, etc., etc. They are playing out this script. And that's a big part of this script. Now that gets generalized into Gentiles who are all called Esau. They are called Edom. They are called Esau in this code that I cracked, that I revealed 20 years ago. And Jews are referred to cryptically as Jacob. And the plan is that they're going to steal the souls of the Gentiles. That is the Kedusha, the holiness, the Tiferes and Ois, the beauty and might of the Gentiles. They want to take all of that, just as in the Exodus, they duped the Egyptians into giving them all their jewels and silver and gold, and they killed the firstborn of the Egyptians, and they stole the gods of the Egyptians. That's all part of the process of appropriating the Kedusha and the Tiferes and Ois of the Gentiles, and that manifest that's focused in on these two messiahs. The Messiah, son of Joseph, is a subversive leader who worms his way into the position of power over the Gentiles in order to subvert them and to bring them into their own deliberate destruction. And that's what Christianity was created to do. That's why Donald Trump was put in power, to bring down America, to bring down NATO, to destroy everything.
What do you think? I don't know if you saw it, but my theory is that the real Jesus was opposed to Yahweh, and they just corrupted the scripture to make it look like exactly what you described. Do you think that's a possibility?
Oh, that's absolutely true. The real Jesus was absolutely opposed to Yahweh. Yahweh was called Samael, Yaltabaoth, etc. Yahweh was the demiurge who messed up creation. It was Yahweh's fault that everything in the world was evil and bad, and that he trapped the souls, the divine sparks of the Logos, from the monad, from the Holy One. He tried to create a world to replicate the higher world, but he was unaware of the higher world. Barbello had a son, and this son became the demiurge and tried to create his own world, and it was a flawed world because he wasn't aware of the ideal forms of the perfect world. And this is all a corruption of Platonism that made the demiurge evil, and that's why the Neoplatonists rejected these Gnostic conceptions. But Yahweh is this ridiculous demiurge, this creator who created this prison of the material world in which the divine sparks are held. And Christianity then leads to the collective suicide of the Gentiles who adopt it, because they believe they are trapped in a corpse of flesh, a prison of flesh in the prison of the material world, and that they can only be saved by dying and freeing themselves, just as Jesus died, and that they would then return the epistrophe, the teshuvah, back to the Holy One that initially emanated them, that the emanation was a negative process, that it created distance from the beauty, the perfection, the truth of the Holy One, and that Yahweh, Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, is a very evil character, and that Jesus came to give us knowledge, gnosis, that all of this had taken place, and his female aspect, Sophia, gave us wisdom, and they provided the esoteric knowledge and means to free the spark of your soul from the prison of the corpse of flesh, so that it could return and engage in epistrophe to the One. The Kabbalists adopted all of that mythology, and the Hasid is supposed to ascend the tree of life and go through each one of the Sephirah to ultimately reach those three divine vessels that never shattered of the Godhead of Keter, Chokhmah, and Binah, the crown, wisdom and understanding, which forms Chabad, is out of Chokhmah, Binah, and Deat, which is the hidden 11th Sephirah, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so this is to be a process of returning to a mystical reunion with God by escaping this flawed world that the demiurge, that Yahweh created, and Jesus Christ came and provided that gnosis, that knowledge for people to do it. But that was a trap for the Gentiles, so that they would reject the material world and leave it in the hands of Jewry. And they were also told that it was highly evil to bear young, because bearing young trapped a divine spark in the prison of the corpse of flesh. So they engaged in abortions. They would eat their semen and menstrual waste. And this went on all the way through the Cathars, etc. And the Roman Catholic Church had to quash it, because if it took over, the very best people, the most intelligent people, enlightened people, benevolent people, were falling into this trap and failing to have children. It would have led to universal sterility, infertility, and the end of the European race, which it was designed to do. So I think you're absolutely right. That's very clearly what the early Christians believed. And he calls them in John chapter 8, verse 44, 45. He calls Yahweh a liar from the beginning, because Yahweh lied in the Garden of Eden and said, if you touch the forbidden fruit, you will surely die. And they touched it and they didn't die, and the forbidden fruit provides the gnosis. Jesus Christ is the serpent, Samael, in the Garden of Eden. The crucifix, the cross, is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He is the serpent in that tree, tempting Adam and Eve to achieve knowledge so that they can be freed from the flawed world of creation of Yaldabaoth.
And you also have a comparison of Yahweh to, the term is Kakademon. I think not many people know what this is. Can you explain that? That was very fascinating to me.
In the ancient world, they had something called cacodemons that took the form of Arminius. It took the form of Vejovis. And these were the evil gods. So you had the benevolent gods who loved humanity, and you had the evil gods who hated humanity, and they were called cacodemons. Now, among the Greeks, the word demon simply meant gods. There were good demons and there were bad demons. It was Eusebius who stigmatized all the pagan gods as if they were satanic and evil, but that was by no means the view of the Greeks. The Greeks predominantly viewed most of the demons as good, lesser gods. But they believed that there were these good gods and these evil gods. And the Romans, for example, would sacrifice black sheep to the evil gods before battle so that they could win their favor and bring them as allies against their enemies. So that they would sacrifice white sheep to the good gods so they would get both sides, Jove and Ve-Jove, on their side fighting their enemies, because the gods had to eat, and the only way they could eat was when human beings sacrificed to them. They needed that food. And the Jews would do the same thing. They had the evil god Samael that they would sacrifice the scapegoat to in order to bribe him. Now, that evil god is the father of the Gentiles. So they would trick that evil god with this bribe to turn him against his own children, and would burden on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and all this is in the Zohar. I've given the exact passages. They continue to bribe on Yom Kippur and on every new moon festival with a goat. They give him this scapegoat. Jesus Christ was this scapegoat so that he turns against his own children and burdens them with all the sins of Israel. It was the Jews who came up with the concept of the scapegoat in this way. And it's in Leviticus chapter 16, so that they could then hang all their sins on the scapegoat, on the Gentiles, and then the Gentiles would be punished in their place. And the ultimate Day of Atonement will be when the Gentiles are exterminated by Samael, who manifests on earth as Messiah, son of Joseph, the Christ returned as the Antichrist to kill off all of Gentile humanity. So the cacodemon is simply the set of evil gods, and the Christians identify Jesus and Yahweh as cacodemons, and ultimately they reject them all. They would curse Jesus. They would spit on Jesus. Paul writes about it in his epistles. And they said that Jesus was the serpent. There was a whole sect of Gnostics, the Naasines, and Nachash is Hebrew for serpent. They were calling Jesus the serpent. So it was a double game. It was all trickery. And they ultimately view all their gods as cacodemons. If you read the Old Testament properly, the Israelites and the Jews always hated Yahweh. They were always rebelling against Yahweh. They thought his commandments were absurd and ridiculous. Jesus called them absurd and ridiculous. They wanted to abandon it. They were always looking for the beautiful, benevolent gods of the other peoples, because they knew that Yahweh was a cacodemon who was perpetually cursing them. But they would make sacrifices to the cacodemons to pit them against other peoples and to keep them from committing harm against them. And the Gnostics also had these little gems that were supposed to do the same thing, that were supposed to appeal to the cacodemons so that they would bow down and be subservient to these gods that hated humanity and win these gods over to their favor to use them against their enemies. But the Old Testament is a series of stories of Yahweh, the cacodemon, cursing the Israelites and the Jews to ultimate destruction if they did not worship him and obey him. And they were perpetually punished for disbelief and disobedience and worshiping the good demons, the good gods. And they always wanted to get away from Yahweh. And they admitted that they would, and Yahweh accused them of simply pretending to love Yahweh and to offer sacrifices to Yahweh to win over his favor. But Yahweh always understood that they hated Yahweh because Yahweh was a real bastard to them and was perpetually cursing them. And Yahweh enforced his authority over them in two ways: by promising to destroy the Gentiles for them, but then cursing them and saying that if they didn't obey him and continue to believe him and study the Torah, that he would do to them what he had promised to do to the Gentiles for them, and he would invert it. And I wrote a whole book about that. It's the second volume in my series, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ, where I talk about cacodemons. It's very interesting. And it was by no means unique to the Jews. The Greeks did the same thing. The Romans did the same thing. They wanted both sides on their side. They worshiped both the evil gods and the good gods to get them on their side. The Egyptians had done it long before Ramses, and many of the others had a cult of Seth that later became the cult of Seth Typhon. Originally among the Egyptians, the evil god Seth was the highest god, ranking god, and they understood that it was to their benefit to have evil as well as good on their side, and to pit those evil gods against their enemies, and to sacrifice to them, to feed them, to give them the energy to destroy their enemies. And the Romans would do it before every battle.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing is that in the New Testament, you can read that Caiaphas says that Jesus is dying for their sins, for the sins of the Israelites. He's saying
to
that
save the nation. That's what Caiaphas said. He has to die to save the nation. It's good that one man should die to save the entire nation. That was one of the big things I put in my book, Beware the World to Come.
Yeah, that I also cited, but of course I credited you for that. Okay, so I encourage everyone to read the books also. It's a complicated topic. Maybe we lost some of the viewers because it's really complicated, but he has everything in his books and also on his in his videos. We don't agree on everything, but that's not so important. So in closing, what do you want to say to our viewers?
That humanity is in very serious danger, that this is not a game. You can read for yourselves what they have planned. The Bible is a #1 international bestseller, and it is a plan to kill everyone. And they are setting about to do it. And they are very good at exploiting the gullibility and the psychology of people. And we are getting at a point where we're going to have to start reading their playbook and create a remnant of ourselves, of our very best to survive this, in the event that these gullible people continue to fall into these traps that are laid before them and kill each other off. We need to preserve samples of our semen, our seed, our eggs. We need to create a nation of our own where we can preserve ourselves, and we ought to preserve our very best. And it's got to be done now. We have to take it seriously, because what they are trying to engineer is to get everyone to go down in the ship together, and the smart rats have to get off the ship before it sinks. And I think to rely upon what she is saying, which I used to say, that we need to spread awareness of all these things, but they wouldn't let me do it. And now we're at the point where they have complete control, because we are now progressing into a world of robotics and artificial intelligence. And they had plans to have
that, because that was very fascinating. But why they are doing the transhumanism thing? Explain that.
They had always planned for them to have 2,800 slaves. It's in Shabbat 32b in the Talmud, that in the end times, Esau would serve as the slave. That's the blessing that Isaac gives to Esau, is to be the soldier to fight for Jacob, as America is doing, and then to be the slave of Jacob. Jacob bows to Esau 7 times, and then it inverts. They don't need Esau anymore. They've got robotics. They've got their slaves. They're even designing sex slaves in robotics. They don't need Esau to tender to garden for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They can utilize artificial intelligence to create and develop their knowledge. In other words, all of the things that they were taught to utilize Esau for can now be, or very soon can be, substituted by robotics and artificial intelligence, so they can now exterminate us. They no longer require slaves. They no longer require Gentile scientists, philosophers, engineers. They don't need us. And they can get rid of us without suffering any detriment. And that was always the plan, and it has been fulfilled. So we are in imminent danger, and we are all being set up to kill each other off. We got to get out of that trap. We got to get smart people with means, with training, with knowledge to formulate a new society, just as they had always planned for a remnant to survive the apocalypse. They talk about 144,000 male Jewish virgins in the book of Revelation. We need to prepare for the likelihood, possibility, I think it's a likelihood, that the rest of humanity is going to kill itself off. And we have to survive it. On the other side of that, that will present us with a depopulated world that we can then construct as we wish to construct. And I anticipate that these people are not only going to kill off 2/3 or 4/5 of their own, they're going to completely destroy themselves, because they want to genetically modify themselves to create 600,000 people out of the Messiah, son of David, just as in their mythology, Noah was a single man who created all of humanity. Adam was a single androgyne who created all of humanity. They believe that their Mashiach ben David, their Messiah, son of David, will be the resurrection of Adam and carry within himself the 600,000 souls that Adam carried. And they are engineering this so that he can convert his skin cells or other DNA material into egg cells and impregnate them with his own semen to create a new race of 600,000 immortal androgynes. And they are developing this technology in Israel. It sounds fantastical, but you can look up the articles, mainstream articles about this research. They are developing these artificial wombs, like the alchemist's homunculi. It's always been their plan to create these artificial wombs. Even in the book of Genesis, it says that natural gendered procreation is evil. Eve was punished with childbirth and menstruation. They want to get away from that. They want to artificially engineer this new race of theirs to replace humanity with 600,000 immortal androgynous people, because they believe that when they restore Adam's form as an androgyne, Yahweh, the Yod-He Vav-He, which was separated into its male and female aspects, will be restored to its androgynous form, as above, so below. That's also why they want to reconstruct the third temple, because the third temple bears the bedchamber in which the Yod-He Vav-He, the male and female aspect of Yahweh, fornicate. And they were initially back to back, and they will turn and face one another and once again be restored to an androgynous being, as Jewish humanity becomes an androgynous being. I think that's going to fail very badly, and they're going to kill themselves off. That creates an opportunity. As cold-hearted as all of that must sound, I believe that is the only way to preserve a remnant, and the intelligent thing to do is to preserve an intelligent remnant of our people.
Yeah, and also they want to connect us to the robots, to trap trap ourselves to the material world, right?
Absolutely, and they want to create the singularity. Rudolf Steiner, who you may be familiar with, talked about this world of these spiders interconnected throughout the atmosphere, and the transportation of the soul across the 7 planets, which gets mimicked in the return, the elevation of the soul in the 10 Sephirot. And they are engineering us into cyborg organisms with Neuralink implants into our brains to link us all together and to create this super intelligence, which is all connected. They are talking about transplanting a human colony to Mars, which is the seat of Samael. Gevura, that's ultimately to get the Ashkenazi Jews, the Chabad Lubavitcher Jews, to give over the earth to the Sephardic Jews and migrate to the 5th planet, the satanic planet of Samael. It's all a series of traps, and it's all a series to bring about the extinction of humanity and replace it with these 600,000 immortal androgynes. And they are advancing very rapidly, and I anticipate that artificial intelligence isn't where they want it to be yet. These robotics don't have the processing power to do what they want, and that humanoid robotic forms are highly efficient. Eventually, they're going to realize that. They're going to put in quantum computing processing, and they're going to change the form of these robots to non-humanoid forms that are far more efficient, just as they do in manufacturing. When they manufacture cars, they don't use humanoid robots to do it. They manufacture those which are efficient to accomplish the task at hand. They are also going to start to re-engineer people's homes to make it efficient so that these new forms of robots can move about efficiently and accomplish their tasks in ways that are not engineered to be utilized by we as humans, but instead are far more efficient for these robots. So these robots don't have to engage in careful balancing and regulating dexterity of fingers and hands, etc. And they're going to get there. They're going to get there to the point where they displace everyone. Everyone becomes unemployed. They're going to manufacture famine. They're going to manufacture civil unrest. They're going to get people on every level, individual level, within their families, societies, against one another, to kill each other off. That was always the plan. Now, all of this also goes back to the Greeks, to Hesiod and others who forecast that there were metallic ages and an age of heroes. And the final metallic age is the Iron Age that we are in now. And they always anticipated, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam repeat this prediction, that when we enter into the Iron Age, we are so distant from the original garden of the natural world, where the natural world provided abundance of food and shelter, and everything was harmonious, and we could love one another, and we were not in competition with one another, which was the golden age that preceded to the silver age, the bronze age, the age of heroes. And the Iron Age, we are now in the Iron Age, in which we all turn against one another. And Jesus said, you have to turn against your own parents, against your own brothers, and become a Christian. And it's all being engineered to pit us against one another. And they always predicted, the Greeks predicted, the Romans adopted this, Judaism adopted this, Christianity adopted this, and Islam has prophecies about this, where we all turn against each other and we all kill each other off. I think that there have been evolutionary pressures within civilizations to start to breed this type of psychopathic people who do not have the emotions that were originally evolutionary traits of our distant ancestors. And this is being accelerated. It's not simply a matter of genetics, but also of environment with this abstraction of this computer world that we're constantly in. You can see how people behave on the internet, how they viciously attack one another. It's like when people get drunk, their real personality comes out. And when they are on the internet, their real personality comes out. And I see a tremendous degradation in the quality of humanity simply from when I was a young child to today, and from the people who were old people when I was a young child to my peers as young child. There's been a very rapid degradation of humanity leading up into this culmination in which we annihilate each other and we kill each other. And there are a lot of people who have resigned themselves to it and want to see it happen. And Christianity has always promoted the idea that we should look forward to this apocalypse because it will mean Jesus will return and we can leave Yahweh's evil demiurgic creation, this prison of the material world. And they're cheering it on. They're saying, go for it, do it. And it's happening. Now, are there enough intelligent people who have the genetic proclivity, the innate evolutionary traits to escape this process of collective suicide and to form an ark, to create a survivable remnant that can emerge on the other side of this and not go down together with all of the stupid, gullible people who are being led to kill each other off? And think of how bad it's going to get when everybody's unemployed, when the United States is no longer a food producer. It loses its agriculture just as it lost its industry to other nations. This is going to get horrific. And they are pitting America against Europe, and they're pitting Russia against Europe and China against Europe. And they are portraying Europeans as evil racists, the descendants of the colonizers who oppress people all over the world, to pit the entire world against us, to exterminate us. And it's happening. It's coming. It's happening in our streets. Our kids are getting beaten up in the schools. It's all been engineered, and it's going down. Now we have to step away from it. We have to segregate. We have to separate from it and preserve a remnant of our very best. If not, it's all going to be lost. All the sacrifices that our ancestors went through, all the evolution that they endured, their battles against nature, all of it will have been in vain, and we will disappear from existence, which is exactly what our enemies are engineering.
All right. So I would say the last saying of what you quoted of Jesus was written in by Jewish writers. As I said, that the Kabbalists wrote the Revelation, but that would be a totally new topic. Thank you very much, Christopher, and I encourage everyone to follow him. And if you read it, it's the best to read the books, because then you can look back and forth, because it's a very, very complicated topic. Thank you very much, Christopher.
Vielen Dank.
Bitte schön.